Welcome to a conversation on international affairs. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our distinguished guest today is John A. McCone. Mr. McCone, a Berkeley alumnus, is an industrialist and engineer. For many years, he was a great public servant, advisor to 5 American presidents, Undersecretary of the Air Force under Truman, head of the Atomic Energy Commission under Eisenhower, director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Presidents Kennedy and Presidents Johnson, and most recently, winner of the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award given by the U.S. government. Mr. McCone has been a member of innumerable U.S. commissions, including the McCone Commission, which he chaired and which investigated the Watts riots. Mr. McCone, welcome back to Berkeley.
Thank you very much. It's a great joy to be back here.
What year did you graduate from Cal?
1922.
Any memories brought back by today's visit?
Oh, yes, great many memories. A great many memories.
You were here at a time when World War I was ending, right?
Yes, I was here at the end of World War I.
And as I recall, you actually were in a class one day when the teacher came in and announced that the war was over. Is that right?
Well, it was a very amusing situation. He called the class to order and said, if the report that we have just heard is true, it appears that the war might be over. The class will now come to order, and everybody ran out of the room. It was a memorable occasion.
So time does not change students. You got a degree in what?
Mechanical engineering.
And what did you do once you had that degree? You went out and you got a job as a riveter?
Well, I had to have a job because I didn't have any money. And I went down to the old Weld Iron Works because I had a letter to the general manager from a roommate of mine, the son of the general manager. And as I got off the streetcar, to call on the gentleman, I ran into the foreman of a shop that I had worked in during the summers. And he asked me what I was going to do, and I told him, and he said he'd give me a job. So I said, what doing? Well, he said, I'll put you in a riveting crew. And I said, okay. So he said, come on in and sign up. So I did, signed up as a riveter in this riveting crew, which I had worked in it during the summertime, so it was no strange entrance. Then I thought after I signed up, and I had to borrow some money from him because I needed a little money to buy some overalls and some shoes to work in. And I promised him I'd pay him on the first payday, which I did. So then I thought, well, I might as well go in and give my letter to the boss so he'd know I was on board. So I went in, and he shook his head, and he said, John, he said, business is very bad, and we don't need anybody right now, but if you give me your name and address, the first opening, I'll get in touch with you. And I said, well, Mr. Taylor, I didn't come in to ask you for a job. I came in to tell you I was going to work for you. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to work in a riveting crew tomorrow morning. Well, he said, do you mean to tell me that after your career in the university studying engineering, you'd go to work as a riveter? And I said, well, you have to eat, and to eat you have to work, so I thought I'd go to work. So I started the next morning and stayed at it for a long time.
And you were there 17 years.
Yes, I was in that company, or what grew out of it, there were mergers went on and that sort of thing for 17 years.
And then why did you decide to leave?
Well, I decided that I could advance no further, and that I had a desire to establish my own engineering firm, which I did, and it was a very friendly separation, but I really felt that under all the circumstances, I'd be better if I had my own company.
And you started with Mr. Bechtel, McCone Bechtel, at that time?
No, I started first as a McCone Engineering Company. Then Steve Butler came down. Steve and I had been lifelong friends, and his father had passed away, and they were reforming the McCullen Company, and we formed, Steve and I merged and formed the McCullen Company, which was a surviving engineering company.
And what sorts of things did you build and construct?
Principally oil refining equipment. That was my purpose when I started the McCone Company, and McCone just followed that on.
What accounts for your success in business? Hard work?
Yes, hard work and determination.
When the war came, you got involved in building ships. Tell us about that. How many men that worked under you during World War II?
Well, at that yard that we had on Terminal Island in Los Angeles, we had 45,000 working, building ships.
And how many ships did you build? Do you recall?
We built 487 ships. That's a number that will stay with me all my life, I believe.
I have a quotation from the New York Herald Tribune about you and your war work. It said, Mr. McCone set production goals higher than anyone thought could be met, and then he made sure they were met. Is that a fair statement about you?
Well, it's hardly a question that I should answer.
Okay.
I set goals, all right.
What was your first government job after the war?
Well, I entered government on a commission that was appointed by President Truman in 1947, called the Air Policy Commission. And that was a 5-man commission to study the trend of air policy right after the war. And I worked very hard on that commission. And from that work on that commission, other challenges in government presented themselves to me.
Mr. Forrestal asked you to be his deputy as he was putting together the Defense Department?
That's right. That's right. He was the first Secretary of Defense. There was no Deputy Secretary of Defense in the legislation at that time. So he asked me to come in and serve as his acting Deputy Secretary of Defense, which I did.
And then you were involved in putting together the first defense budget.
Yes. The first assignment he gave me was to put together a budget for the Department of Defense. The Air Force had just been created by the National Defense Act of 1947, and so we had to carve out of the appropriations for the Army sufficient funds to get the Air Force started, and that was all part of the responsibility that Secretary Forrestal assigned to me.
Was there a lot of table pounding when you did that first budget?
And bloodletting, yes.
It was just as hard then as now to squeeze the dollar.
Yes, but they were smaller dollars. We were talking about a very small budget in terms of what they're talking about now. But there was just as much competition then as there is now for the available dollars.
What about Truman? What do you recall most about Truman? Any thought that you would like to leave us with about President Truman, who you worked under?
Yes, I did not know President Truman very well when I was working for Forrestal, because I was at a level that you don't often see the president. But I'll tell you an amusing story. I was having a terrible time to get the budget down to $11.5 billion, which Truman insisted is as far as he'd go. And the military that I was working with, the Army, Navy, and representatives of the Air Force, squeezed and worked as I did, but only got down to 11.9 billion. So Forrestal said, Mr. Forrestal said, let's go over and talk to the president. So I went over there. I explained to the president the problem of getting below 11.9 billion and not reaching his goal of 11.5 billion. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do, John. He said, I'll go from 11.5 to 11.7 if you go from 11.9 to 11.7. I said, okay. And that was the way it was settled, at 11.7.
Very good, very good. What about President Eisenhower? What do you think his major contribution was?
Oh, his major contributions are a great number, but it will take me quite a long time to run through them all and to separate his contributions as president from his contributions as a military leader. But I think the fact that he brought a period of peace to the country was his greatest contribution.
And he must have felt that because he really had known war in a way no other man had.
He felt it very, very deeply. You see, he'd been overseas before he came back as president, and he'd seen us get into the Korean War, and while he had no criticism of it, I think he really thought we had no choice except to go into the Korean War. Certainly that's the way I feel. He felt the nation needed a period of peace and quiet and normality.
In the Kennedy administration, you served as Director of Central Intelligence. Were you surprised when President Kennedy made you the offer of that position?
Very much so. Very much so.
Did President Kennedy ask you to take that role right after the Bay of Pigs disaster? And you instituted a number of reforms as the new director. What is the reform at the CIA that you're most proud of?
Well, that's difficult to answer, but I think the reform that I made was to break down the barriers of secrecy that existed between small groups in the Central Intelligence Agency and broaden the base of those who knew about pending covert operations particularly, so that there'd be a judgment factor brought in. And I think that was the most significant contribution I made in the early days.
And in the Bay of Pigs, that wasn't happening. The covert people weren't talking to the analysts. Is that?
That's right. That's right. And Well, I wasn't there at the Bay of Pigs because my appointment was sometime after that. I had a post-mortem analysis made of the whole operation, and had they brought in some analysts, I think they'd have taken a different course.
A key event, of course, in the Kennedy administration is the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's correct.
You were really the only one in the government early that summer who was warning about the possibility of missile emplacement in Cuba, right?
That's right.
Why did you have that hunch? What made you think that that might be up down there?
Well, it was a judgment factor. You see, we had witnessed 16,000 Soviet troops come into Cuba with all of their ordnance equipment. We'd seen these surface-to-air missiles come in and be placed, and then here came a number of ships that headed out of the Baltic and the Black Sea, all headed towards Cuba. Well, it was my judgment that there was nothing more to ship unless they shipped some missiles. And I appealed to my associates in the administration, telling them of my opinion, but the missiles weren't there. They were on the ship, so I had no real hard intelligence. So it was a judgment factor that led me to the conclusion.
You were really the only one in the government who was making this argument, correct?
That's right.
And it was, and the turnaround in the government was only when the first pictures were produced.
That's correct.
And you were on your honeymoon when the pictures came back. Is that correct? Were you summoned
No,
back?
I was back.
You were back. You was back already. Okay.
Back when I had the pictures were taken because when I was on my honeymoon, they, for one reason or another, they didn't take the pictures of Cuba. And when I got back and I found out that they had not taken daily U-2 photographs, I ordered U-2 flights daily, and the first one picked up this this missile coming in.
And so President Kennedy, when he had this evidence, gathered together this group of government leaders, which began meeting as the ExCom committee. You were a member of that committee.
That's correct.
And your role in that committee was to brief the others?
Well, yes. Yes, I'd have a meeting of the intelligence board every morning and analyze all the latest intelligence, and then I'd go to the ExCom and review what the intelligence board thought of the meeting an hour earlier, and then we'd proceed with discussions of the ExCom.
In those meetings, Bobby Kennedy was very important, wasn't he?
Yes.
The president could trust him, it was his brother, and he could come to the meetings really without the president.
Yes, he'd come without the president. Sometimes he'd come with the president. The president had great confidence in some others too, you know. He was not wholly dependent on Bobby Kennedy, although the president and the Attorney General were very close. But the president had great confidence in Rusk and in McNamara.
That crisis was really President Kennedy's finest hour. He really proved himself as a manager, really, of men and sort of the great events.
Well, I always admired him for the manner in which he laid out the procedure that we should follow, giving Khrushchev an opportunity to retract if he wished to change courses, and never forcing him into a position where the ultimate was war. And I thought President Kennedy did very well.
In those meetings at first, Mr. McNamara argued that it really didn't matter that the missiles had been placed in Cuba, but you believe that it did matter.
Oh, of course it matters.
Why did it matter that the Soviets had put the missiles there?
Well, you get 40 or 50 short-range missiles that are 100 miles away that are absolutely accurate. They can do damage while you were just thinking about it. No, I thought it made a very, very great difference.
Why did Khrushchev do it, do you think?
Well, there are books written on that.
President Kennedy died shortly after that. Do you think it would have made a difference with regard to Vietnam if he had stayed as president? Would he have kept us from getting involved there?
Yes. I was satisfied that he was determined to reduce our presence in Vietnam rather than build it up as President Johnson did.
You opposed the escalation.
Very much so.
In arguments with President Johnson.
Yes.
Your counsel was not heeded.
No, it was not.
What observation do you have to make about President Johnson that you would like to leave us with? Any?
Well, I was always critical of President Johnson for building up the Vietnam War to the proportions that he built it up, and at the same time not using our military facilities to a point where we would win the war. I took the position that if you're going to be in a war, you better win it. But President Johnson was very loath to make any move that he thought might cause the Chinese communists to become engaged.
So with that in mind, you left government service and really returned back to your business careers.
I concluded my tour as director of CIA. I was there 4 years and returned to private life.
The history books record already that John McCone was may have been our last great director of the CIA. I want to ask you to agree with that. Were you a success as director of the CIA because of your business background? Did that make you a better director of the CIA?
Yes, I think the training that I'd had as a businessman and a business executive, a business manager, helped immeasurably in the management of CIA.
When you came in, you were a budget cutter at the CIA, weren't you?
I always prided myself on being a budget cutter.
And the first time you saw a CIA budget, which projected out what I believe you told me in another conversation, that you thought the figures were too high for the future?
Well, I like to tell this story, but the CIA budget was a best-kept secret in Washington, as you know. And I was briefed on it, and the last part of the briefing was a 5-year forecast. And the forecast showed the budget just a little over twice what it was the current year. So I said, now, I'd like you fellows to come back in a week and show me a budget with no growth in it. I said, I don't want to operate this organization and turn it over to somebody at the end of 5 years with this budget twice what it is now. So let's see what we can do. Well, they became very put out about it. They didn't know what kind of a beast was going to be running the place. But in any event, they did put a budget together, and it was just even for the 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, it was $20 million less. So I always took a great deal of personal pride in that.
You were part of a very impressive generation that made American foreign policy. Your friends, I mean, I could just rattle off the names of your friends and associates, McCloy, Lovett, Harriman, Forrestal, on and on. These were all hardworking men. They were all very successful professionals. They were very intelligent. What, in your view, made these wise men what they were, you being one of them?
Well, don't put me with that class, because I'm not in that class.
Well, that's subject to disagreement.
But those men that you mentioned were brought into government by the war. And they went down there, they gave up their business, they gave up their lives to help the government in its distress. And they all deserve a lot of credit, a lot of admiration.
And they all had made their fortunes elsewhere or could return to other careers. Was that helpful, do you think, in their...
Oh, very much so. See, they were all wealthy men, many of them outstanding lawyers, gave up their practices, went down, worked in the bureaucracy.
Now, a word that you use a lot is judgment, a judgment call. Did these men, like John McCone, have a very good sense of judgment that made all the difference when they made decisions?
Oh, yes. Yes, they were men that had the strength to make a decision and the wisdom to make a correct decision.
Is this a way of doing business that one can train future generations to be like them?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. But I think men develop that budget, that judgment factor by association with others, equal responsibility, and the contact gives them a feeling of the proper decisions, proper courses to pursue.
One final question. If you could give the next president a piece of advice about running our foreign policy, what would it be?
Well, I think he would have to be very careful, exceedingly careful in the judgments that he would exercise.
Mr. McCone, on that note, I want to thank you very much for giving us this time. It was a great privilege to be able to record this interview with you. Thank you very much for coming back to Cal.
Well, I'm very glad to be back here.
Good.
I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here on the campus after so many years.
Good. We're glad that you could come back and share these thoughts with us. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for joining us for this conversation on international affairs.
For information on this series, contact the Institute of International Studies, 215 Moses Hall, UC Berkeley, Berkeley, California 94720, or call area code 415-642-2474.